We've used the timeline control a couple times now to make some of our animations. I want to show you a few more of the features that you can do with the timeline to make your animation editing a little bit easier. I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to name this Timelines. And I'm going to switch to the animation workspace so my timeline is a little bit bigger and I've got more room to work. Now let me go ahead and create a new timeline. I'm just going to use the default name. And let's look at the timeline a little bit and see some of the other features. Now as I drag my playhead around, you'll notice that it stops at every 1/10 of a second intervals. Now that's the default behavior for the timeline, but I can change that. The first thing I can do is I can turn snapping off altogether, and now as I click around, the playhead will move to any arbitrary time. Additionally, I can click on the small black arrow and change my snapping. So right now, the default snapping is to 10 snaps per second. If I were to say change that to 2, now my playhead is going to stop every half second. By changing the snapping, I can make sure that I'm working with frames of exactly the size that I'm interested in. The frame forward and frame backward buttons actually move one snap point forward, so by changing my snapping, I can also modify how large a step that these buttons make. Another item you have on the timeline is a zoom control. I can move down to the bottom, and I can change my zoom to say 300%, and I can see much more higher resolution of where my individual timeline is. Alternatively, I can snap it out to 25%, and now my timeline is significantly more compressed, and I can see on a much larger scale. If you're working with very small animations or very large animations, you can see very easily how this will make manipulating your timelines that much simpler. Now I want to play with motion paths a bit more. I'm going to switch my timeline back to 100%, and I'm going to come out of my timeline 1. We saw before when I create a path like this, and a second path to apply to it, I can select any of my elements, and using the path command, convert it to a motion path. I just need to specify my target, and now when I press play, my circle will move along the ellipse. With a simple path like this, it makes sense how the circle is going to move. But what happens if we've got some more unusual paths? Let me come out of my timeline again, and I'm going to take the ellipse that I used before and chop a piece out of it. I'm going to create a rectangle, cut right through my ellipse, select both the rectangle and the ellipse, and do a combine subtract. Now if you look at this path, I've got two completely separate segments, so what do we expect the ellipse to do when it follows this path? Well, I'm going to go to Object, Path, Convert to Motion Path, and when I select my ellipse, we'll find that when we run the animation, the ellipse will go along each segment separately. So by using this, I can create multiple individual paths and have my motion path cause my elements to move along each one in turn. Now what if this isn't the behavior that I want? I don't want it to jump from the right segment to the left. Well, let me go into the motion path for my ellipse, and I can make some modifications. I'm going to grab the direct selection tool and delete these segments, and then use my pen tool to reconnect them. Now I can connect them however I want. This point's already selected, so I just need to select the point that I want to connect it to. So now I've modified my motion path, and when I press play, it's going to move along those segments, but transition from one piece to the other smoothly. I can continue to make modifications to my motion path to make whatever kind of effect that I want. Now, let's take a look at what happens if you use a compound path. Let me come out of this timeline. I'm going to delete this path, and now I'm going to create a new one. Let me create two rectangles. Select them both. And this time, I'm going to divide them. Now you can remember when we were discussing the different combine operations earlier, I have one compound path that has all 5 of the individual pieces. Now watch what happens when I take this path and convert it to a motion path. My ellipse goes to one of the corners of one of the segments, and as I hit play, the ellipse moved very quickly around each one of the segments. Now, since that animation was only 2 seconds long, let me stretch that out so you can see a little bit more easily what's happening. And now that I've taken the path that contains the 2 rectangles and moved it into the motion path for my ellipse, I don't need that original path anymore. So let me select it and delete it. Now when I press play, you'll see that the ellipse is going to go around each of the individual pieces, drawing where they were. When you create a motion path from a compound path, it's going to take each individual section and loop around each one. Now I can go to my direct selection tool, select my motion path, and once again modify those points. And as I modify the points, it's going to go around the new bracketed segments. Now, I may not know off the top of my head wonderful uses for this particular type of animation, but I'm sure as you get into your user experiences, you'll find some areas where these more abstract motion paths can be useful. And that's all for timelines, so I'm just going to close it.